Why don't we start off on just you telling the camera the importance of the Hobnobben Film Festival?
The importance of the Hobnobben Film Festival is that's difficult to assess, right? Because the Hobnobben Film Festival functions on a number of different levels. It functions as a fundraiser for Cinema Center. It functions as a community gathering event. It functions as a way, having a film festival like this is a way to add credibility to a city, right? If Fort Wayne didn't have a film festival, Fort Wayne would be lacking something. And so the fact is that Hobnobben functions on these different levels to do different things. And so, here at Cinema Center, we're the gathering place for the cinematic arts in Fort Wayne. We're the place where you come if you're a filmmaker to meet other filmmakers in Fort Wayne. We're a place where you come if you are a movie nerd. We're a place where you come, if you just want to talk to other people about important issues. And, Hobnobben covers that gamut of things, right? Just the Q&A I was just doing on the last panel had both a scientist who studies waterways and a filmmaker who makes movies about waterways. And and those two coming together and having an artist sitting there talking about the craft of filmmaking when you get a really interesting shot of some really small egg of a salamander or salamander. And then the scientists talking about the importance of preserving those waterways and the ways in which to get fish and wildlife back into them. There isn't another place in town where that conversation is going to happen. And so without it, we're lacking something, we're missing something as a community. And so, to try and assess the importance of Hobnobben is a little weird simply because it is important on like 70 different levels.
Right, and I think one of the important points of emphasis you make with the Cinema Center is that it's a place for the community, and you're really focused on growing the community. Why is not only being the harbor for this community important for the region, but for the state of filmmaking as a whole?
Well, I mean, one of the things I will say is, I often joke, Cinema Center is not for everybody, right? The fact is that if you're interested in just the stories told in Marvel movies, there's a place for you here in town. You can go and see those movies, and we don't begrudge other theaters their successes, and we certainly don't want to be a place that would say we would never show a Marvel movie, because there are Marvel movies that start wonderful conversations. But the fact is that not everybody is interested in cinema as an art form. It's just, not everybody's cup of tea, which is fine. That's great. It should be that, different things are for different people. And so, when we say the community in this instance, one of the things we're talking about is it's really good for Fort Wayne as a city to have a place like Cinema Center where people can go and gather and talk about these kinds of things. But when we talk about growing our community, a lot of times what we're talking about is getting the word out to people such as us, such as the people who are in this room, such as myself, who are interested in the cinematic arts and do want to have these conversations about, like I said, in the last block, the first question I asked in the Q&A was to the director about how she got this tadpole in frame in a shot, like the lens and the shallow depth of field she got on that shot was outstanding. And what were you doing to get that shot? And, somebody who would ask that question has a home here at Cinema Center. And we have a weekend of conversations like that one here for Hobnobben. And so, when we talk about community, what we're talking about is people who gather around these important issues and use a film to spur a conversation. We just had the Center for Nonviolence screen a film here to talk about both the center itself and the issues important issues that they talk about as, part of their nonprofit organization. And we can have a conversation about that organization that started with a movie. And so, what we're trying to do is build as many conversations as we can around the art of film And sometimes the conversation is about the content, and sometimes it's about how did you get that shot. And so, this is the role we play, is how many times and how many good conversations can we start? And that's the hope, and it's the hope for Hobnobben being a place that celebrates that for a weekend, where we sit here and we do it with local films and international films and documentary films and science fiction films and all of those kinds of things.
So we're halfway through day 2 of the festival so far, and more than halfway now at this point. So by the time the weekend's done, the festival's over, what is one thing to you that at the end of the day makes you say, this was a successful event?
People walking away with that feeling of, feeling full. And this is not a, we ate good food moment. This is a, oh man, I wouldn't have thought about that, or I wouldn't have, explored that issue, or I wouldn't have, the more people who walk out of Cinema Center this weekend thinking about the content and the conversation, the more successful the festival was. Ultimately, I joke, and I, on more than one occasion, have joked that if you walk out of Cinema Center talking about something other than what you saw or what we talked about in Cinema Center, then we failed. We programmed the wrong thing. Because ultimately what we're doing should be thought-provoking and interesting. And, Cinema Center over this past summer showed the old, Christopher Reeve's Superman film. We show Superman films. Why? Because we want to talk about blockbusters. We want to talk about the issues surrounding blockbusters and what blockbusters do to an industry of film and those kinds of things. And so we are not precluded from doing anything here at Cinema Center as long as what we do has people thinking about the issues pertaining to and surrounding film. And so when Hobnobben is successful, it meets that same criteria, right? Hobnobben is successful when the people who come to Hobnobben are engaged and entertained, obviously, but also, thinking about the kinds of things that they saw on screen. And so, if people are walking out of here with a little different perspective, maybe on the world, some of the people often joke, why do you guys show so many international films? Well, not all of us get to travel to Iran. We've got films from Iran. And so we're getting to see a slice of the world that most people in Indiana may never see. And so, it's an opportunity to explore, examine, and hear stories from places that, you might never get to see. And that's an important thing. And so, that's what makes a success for me, is when people leave here having seen or experienced or talked about something that maybe they wouldn't have done any other way.
What do you envision Cinema Center and Hobnobben, like their footprint essentially being within the next 5 years?
I think it's important not to think of it that way. Hobnobben is an event that engages our members and the community and those kinds of things, but we're not a volume event, right? It's not like what we want to do is get bigger and expand. What we want to do is be more engaging and have more opportunities. And so, Hobnobben's never going to be Sundance, and for the most part, we don't want it to be. What we want to do is provide opportunities and different paths to understanding and different kinds of conversations and those kinds of things. And so, we're never going to get the films that screened at Tribeca. But the films we're going to get are things that, come from Indiana filmmakers sometimes. They're things that come from all over the world, and they're engaging us in ways that Fort Wayne wouldn't otherwise have. The fact is, the films that screen at Sundance will probably at some point screen at Cinema Center. They will, because they get distributors. And so Hobnobben's not that. Hobnobben isn't just another weekend at Cinema Center. Hobnobben is something different and something unique, and it should be, and it should remain that way. And so my hope is that Hobnobben stays that 5 years from now and continues to be that opportunity that wouldn't otherwise happen. And so, the fact is that, for me, growing per se is not necessarily the most important thing. The most important thing is being able to bring this to the community of Fort Wayne without, losing that identity.
And what is, like, I know this year was like, I think the highest percentage of Indiana filmmakers in the festival. Is that something in particular you're trying to harbor with Hobnobben, or did it just happen that way?
Yeah, I don't know if that's something we're trying to do with Hobnobben as much as, the fact is that Indiana is a growing but also struggling kind of film community. Indiana needs support, but they also, the filmmakers here also need a place to go to gather. And so, the fact is that Cinema Center needs to be a place where if I've got a script, I can go and meet a cinematographer. And so, one of the things that we are trying to cultivate, trying to build, is a sense of, this is the place where you go to have that experience. The joke is in Los Angeles, every person you would knock into has a script in their back pocket, right? It's not necessarily true in Indiana. And so if I do have a script in my back pocket, where do I go to find somebody who, has a camera and a microphone? And where do I go, and this needs to be that place. And so the opportunity for Hobnobben to celebrate that work, many of the films that come out of creative Indiana filmmakers don't get distributed. I mean, luckily Rocky was here and he talked about, the streaming platform for Hoodocs and those kinds of things, and there are opportunities now, but that Hoodocs isn't, paying somebody $100,000 to license their film, right? The hope oftentimes when you make a film is that you can make enough money off it to make your next, right? And so the fact is that finding ways to help build these networks and give people the opportunity to show their work is also the chance to get other people to see the value in that work and to want to continue to produce that work. And so, if Hobnobben can be a platform to show people the value in creating cinema here in Indiana, then that's a really positive impact that the Hobnobben can have. And so having local filmmakers in the festival will always be something we try to do or strive to do. And so if the work's there, we're going to celebrate it.
And lastly, your famous question is, what haven't I asked you?
I think the biggest thing to take away from Hobnobben is that this work is important. And when I say this work, I'm talking about being Cinema Center, I'm talking about having a film festival, I'm talking about making these movies, I'm talking about all of it. This stuff's important, and I don't think we talk enough about the role that this kind of art can play in a community. It can make your entire city and your entire world better. This isn't just, having these artists in this area isn't just about, making sitcoms or feature films or anything like that. It's also about the quality of commercials you see on your television, right? The fact is that, having these kinds of artists in our community allows us to build things that raise our community up as a whole, right? And so, the ability for a local business to air a commercial because they had, somebody in town that's a cinematographer and another somebody in town who's an editor and those kinds of things, the more people in a community like that, the more we can build something sustainable and have networks of people. And so having this part of Fort Wayne is important. And getting people to recognize that and getting people to support that is challenging at times. And so bringing people to Hobnobben and getting them to see the power that this kind of storytelling can have and the different ways in which you can find a path to telling these stories, I think that's important. And so, building that up, it takes time, it takes effort, but it also takes the recognition of people of how important this is.